Welcome to Spanky's Garage. Today we're going to be working on installing a coolant overflow tank on our 1969 Mustang. Back in the 60s, they didn't use overflow tanks for the radiator. We're going to fix that on my 1969 Mustang so that as the coolant expands and overflows, it has a safe place to go. So before we install it, we'll spend some time talking about exactly how the system worked, what this is going to benefit us, and exactly why I'm doing it. Now in the 60s, the 1969 Mustang didn't have an overflow tank on the car itself. The way that it worked is it had a radiator with a cap on it that was pressurized, and when it would hit a certain pressure inside of the radiator system, it would actually open up, that radiator cap would lift a little bit, and it would put coolant out through that tube and onto the ground wherever the car is. So that's what we're trying to avoid. Now, antifreeze is toxic, it's sweet tasting, it's not good to have around children, it's not good to have around animals. So one of the biggest things that we want to do is we want to make sure that we don't spill any and we don't get any on the ground. So we're going to go ahead and we're actually going to install this overflow tank to remedy that. Now this overflow tank, the reason why I got this one, even though it says it's made for a 65 to 68, I'm going to try to fit it on my big block radiator, which is the larger size radiator, with some slight modifications. I don't want to have to modify the radiator itself. I don't want to have to modify the fan shroud itself. My main goal is to keep everything as it is in the car and just connect it. Now, one of the main reasons why I'm doing this and why I'm installing the radiator overflow tank is because in order to race at a lot of the tracks around here, so NHRA tracks, you can't have an open cooling system on the track. If you've ever got coolant on the floor or antifreeze on the floor and you stepped on it, you probably know how slippery it is. I think you actually have to burn it off to be able to get this slipperiness off of the track, and it'll close it down the track for a long while. So if you're running an open cooling system, they typically don't like that. Probably won't find a lot of tracks that are letting you run that way anymore. So we're going to install this coolant overflow tank specifically so we can take the car to the drag strip and race it next year. That is one of my main goals. So let's go ahead and let's start taking the car apart, looking at how everything's going to fit together, then putting together a plan on how to install this without having to make any modifications to the car itself. All right, so the coolant recovery tank that I bought was from Scott Drake. It's actually made for a 65 to 68 Mustang, but we're gonna try to make it fit. I think these are adjustable. You can put it wherever you want on it, so we're gonna make sure that everything fits. And my main goal here is to keep it, you know, this changes the look of the engine bay. It's not really looking stock anymore. The way that I want to make sure that this is set up is if I did want to take it out, I could remove it. So my goal is not to drill new holes in the car. My goal is to try to utilize common mounting points for this. All right, so where I think I'm going to be mounting this is on these two brackets right here. You can see the two screws that are holding the radiator shroud in. So with these mounted in here, this will be up against the windshield washer reservoir, which has some flex in it, so it'll hold it more in place, but it looks like it should fit when bolted down and screwed down. So with this on, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna start assembling the tank. The other option is over there, which would have been easier because if it was over there, then I could just route this hose to that side, but since I'm gonna have to do this, I'm gonna have to take the hose, run a quick 180 down to the bottom, and then up to the coolant reservoir. So it's pretty simple. It just looks like a aluminum piece all nicely welded together. Has a NPT fitting in the bottom, and then up top you have this, which looks like it has an O-ring seal and a cap that looks like it's relieves some pressure, so you can't completely overflow it. I don't think I'm going to end up putting this piece in. I'm going to clean this up and end up using this blank. It does come with a carbon fiber coolant logo for it, but honestly, not a big fan of the carbon fiber look, especially on this older car. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get this ready. To do this, I'm going to figure out exactly where these go. So in the car, it's going to be mounted off like this. I'm going to move the coolant line away. So like this. So that means I just need to open these up. Going to be, but you want to make sure it doesn't come loose. First, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take a measurement from the center line of this screw to the center line of this screw on the car, just so I can get these somewhat lined up before I end up bolting them in place. About 10.5 inches. About 10.5, but I'm actually going to bias this more towards the bottom. So we're close to 10.5. So you can see the bottom of the tank, that connection is actually making contact, and that is pretty much where that bracket needs to go. So I need to replace that brass fitting with an elbow to be able to make it work. So off to the hardware store. All right, so I was able to order them online. I wasn't able to get the fitting that I wanted at Home Depot, but I was able to get it off Amazon. So I got an 1/8 NPT to 5/16 hose, which is what I needed to get this on the car. Did a quick pre-fit check, and with this elbow, it's actually gonna fit in the car and I don't have to modify anything else. With that, I was also able to get the right tube, so the 5/16 hose. So let's go ahead, let's start putting this together and let's get it on the car. Now I'm gonna just use some pipe thread sealant on it. Just gonna get some on the outside here, and I'm gonna put it in. So I also marked off on this exactly where that needs to be pointed for the best path. Okay, now with this pre-installed, I'm actually gonna install the tubing for it before I bolt it down, and I wanna make sure everything fits, and I'm gonna go ahead and bolt it in place and we'll take a look at it. All right, now we're set to go in the car. All right, so the coolant overflow tank is installed. It really wasn't that bad of an install, and I was able to make it work with the hardware that came with it, even though the kit isn't specific for a 1969 Mustang. I had to change out the elbow to a 90-degree elbow, and I had to use the bolts that came with it as studs to be able to space it off enough to get clearance to install the tank. Now, I wouldn't recommend using the fan shroud hardware that's on there right now. I tried it a little bit, and what I noticed is it just wasn't, it was too sprung, and there was a chance that it potentially could fall off. So using a bolt and a nut, I think, is really important to making sure that it stays in place where you want it to. After this, I was able to route the hose from the bottom of the tank up in front of the radiator and into the cap so that it's out of the way of the fan, so there won't be any issues with that hose hitting the fan and causing any damage. Thanks for tuning in to Smacky's Garage. I'll see you next time.